Ladies and gentlemen, we are today going to be looking at the Princes of Wales line of succession. We're going to be going through every single Prince of Wales in British history from the last Welsh Prince of Wales in the year 1283 all the way to the modern day with Prince William, Prince of Wales. We're going to get into this. I got the format. We got all 20 plus Princes of Wales in here. So I hope you guys are excited. So without further ado, let's get into this. We're going to get down to some business here, boys. Oh yeah, you got to be excited for the Prince of Wales, baby. Love me some Princes of Wales. Let's go. Hello everyone, and today we are going to be looking at sort of a different type of line of succession. This is not the usual monarch line of succession. Actually, today we're not even looking at monarchs. We are looking at the list of every single British Prince of Wales since the year 1240. Okay? Now, this is a little bit of an interesting topic because a lot of the Princes of Wales, for those of you that don't know what the Prince of Wales is, it is a title that is usually given to the eldest son of the British monarch. Now, in this case, we're going to mainly learn about, when the monarchs became Prince of Wales before they were king, and also some potential monarchs that missed out. Most of the Princes of Wales over the years, over the centuries, have later become king. But there are a couple that have not. Actually, quite a few that have not. And we're going to go through all of those, and we're going to start in the year 1240 with Wales, when Wales was actually its own principality, because the Principality of Wales was its own separate entity back in the 1200s, and it was eventually conquered by Edward I. So, without further ado, let's go. I don't want to make this too terribly long. So, here's the format of this. Basically, let's whip out the laser pointer, as you guys already know. I'm sorry it's been a while since I've made a video. I've been very, very busy with my life past couple days. And sorry if my voice sounds a little hoarse. I am screaming. I've been screaming the last few days because of marching band, so I might need to take a drink of a beverage. Ooh, man, that exploded all up in me. And in my arm and stuff. But we got Coke, Cola. Anyway. Now, we're starting off here with, I'm going to be honest, I have no idea how to pronounce this guy's name. Ielwyn ap Gruffydd of Wales. He was the last Welsh Prince of Wales and was actually one of the first victims of hanging, drawing, and quartering. Now, he ruled Wales, the Principality of Wales, starting in the year 1240, and he died in 1282. Now, he was mainly... So here's how we're doing this. I'm going to show the monarch over here, the various monarchs who were reigning when the Princes of Wales were holding that title. But the Prince of Wales, the title was actually, he was kind of the monarch of Wales at the time. Wales was, like I said, a separate entity to England. But the King of England for most of this time, at least from 1240 to 1272, was Henry III. So I put Henry III's picture up here. Henry III, by the way, he was an Angevin monarch, ruled over the Angevin Empire in England during that period. He was part of the House of Plantagenet, the son of King John of England. So this is the English flag, and that's going to stay English until 1700s. So, but in 1272, Henry III did die, and then Edward I comes in 1272, and then in 1283 conquers Wales. He's known as the Hammer of the Scots and the Conqueror of Wales because he did take over. He's an Edward Longshanks. He was a great king for England, expanded the territory immensely, was able to annex Wales, conquer Wales, bring Wales into England, and combined it with England. So England and Wales are now, they're all part of England now. And he incorporates the Welsh titles into the English monarchy. So he creates the title Prince of Wales later down the line in the year 1301. Creates the title Prince of Wales and gives it to his eldest son, Edward. So Edward was really the first English Prince of Wales. Like I said, the title wasn't created until 1301. But following the death of Yelwell, there was another Prince of Wales who only reigned for less than a year. In 1283, Edward I came in, and the last Welsh Prince of Wales was one of the first victims of hanging, drawing, and quartering, which Edward I was the first monarch of England to incorporate hanging, drawing, and quartering as a punishment. For those of you guys that don't know what hanging, drawing, and quartering is, basically they put you up on a big ladder, hang you, they go up there, cut open all your organs, and throw them out above a pit of fire, basically. And then they attach all 4 of your limbs to 4 separate horses, pull the reins on the horses, and they all run in different directions, splitting your entire body open. So, not a good time to be Welsh during that period. But it was conquered, and then Edward I was the first monarch to implement that title on his eldest son, Prince Edward of Caernarfon. Now, for those of you guys that know your British history and English history, you will know that this is actually King Edward II, because, like I mentioned before, the title Prince of Wales was a title that was given to the eldest son of the monarch. Now, Edward I over here, he did have 2 sons, but the eldest of which was Edward. I think his second son was, I think his name was Geoffrey. I could be wrong, but I think that was his name. But Edward was born in 1284, the year, ironically, the year after Edward I conquered Wales. Now, I actually have a family tree of all the British monarchs over here. Useful chart. Shout-outs to them for, making that. Sorry about that little technical difficulty right there. So yeah, Edward II was the very first Prince of Wales as the eldest son of, my webcam screwed up, of Edward I over here. Edward I was king. Edward II, or Prince Edward of Caernarfon, I put basically up here the name of them as they were Prince of Wales, what their title was when they were prince, because he was not King Edward II yet. He wasn't king yet until his father died. So the title is first bestowed upon him in the year 1301, and then he serves as Prince of Wales until 1307 when his father, Edward I, dies. Edward I dies, I think he's like 68 years old when he dies, and I don't know where he died, but he was in England. Newark-on-Trent, maybe? That might have been where he died. I'm not too sure. Maybe that was John. I don't know. But 1307 is when Edward II becomes king. Now, the title Prince of Wales does not instantly get passed on, because he actually doesn't have any sons at this time. The next person to hold the title Prince of Wales is going to be the eldest son of Edward III, all the way in 1343, so 36 years later, Edward the Black Prince. Now, let me go... Well, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have my crown on. Now, we're getting out of business, because Edward the Black Prince is one of the greatest princes of Wales. At least he did a lot for England. He's so a great man. I mean, he looks awesome. I'm going to look at him. Edward the Black Prince. Now, Edward the Black Prince, for those of you guys that don't know, did not actually end up inheriting the throne of England, because he died a year before his father. His father was Edward III. Edward III had 5 sons in total. He created the royal duke system. So he had a bunch of titles for his sons. Obviously, his eldest son was Edward the Black Prince, who was the Prince of Wales. His second son was Lionel, who was the Duke of Clarence. His third son was John of Gaunt, who was the Duke of Lancaster. And then his fourth son was the Duke of York, and his name was Thomas Woodstock, the Duke of York. No. Thomas Woodstock was the Duke of, what was he? Shoot, I can't think. Oh, God. Let's see if there's anything over here. Edmund Langley was the Duke of York. And then Thomas Woodstock, I think he was the Duke of Gloucester. That's what he was, the Duke of Gloucester. So, Gloucester, York, Lancaster, and Clarence, and then Wales. So, like, all the entities. He wanted to spread his kingdom amongst his sons, which was a good move on his part to make the realms more powerful and to keep them, in check. But that's also a big problem, because Edward III lived a very long time. None of his sons actually ended up becoming king, because his eldest son, Edward the Black Prince, he dies of dysentery in 1376, as a result of fighting in the 100 Years' War. He was a very good commander in the 100 Years' War, Edward the Black Prince. He's very famous for that. And so he's crowned Prince of Wales in 1343. He was born in 1330, so he's 13 years old when he's crowned Prince of Wales. Edward III becomes King of England in 1327. 3 years later, he has his eldest son, Edward the Black Prince. And then 13 years after that, he crowns him Prince of Wales. Edward the Black Prince serves as Prince of Wales for a whopping 33 years. 33 years, which is pretty much the longest of the Middle Ages for any non-monarch title in England. Like the Prince of Wales, the longest serving Prince of Wales of the medieval period, definitely goes to Edward the Black Prince. Now, he was set to become king, but Edward III dies in 1377. Edward the Black Prince dies in 1376, obviously of dysentery, most likely caught on the battlefield. Dysentery was a very common disease for centuries that people would get for fighting on the battlefield. It was basically inflammation, infectious diarrhea is what dysentery is. For those of you that don't know, you've played the Oregon Trail. You have died of dysentery. Yeah, that's how that's from. There is a big fly on top of my webcam right now. I hope he doesn't get in front of the camera, but he's big. Anyhow, that's where the Black Prince dies. Also, I forgot to mention, this is the coat of arms for the Prince of Wales. Now, Edward the Black Prince dies, so you're probably wondering what happens to the heir after Edward the Black Prince dies. Does it go to his second son, Lionel? Well, Lionel's dead. So the third son, John of Gaunt, but that's not how it goes, because Edward the Black Prince actually has a son named Richard. Now, Richard becomes the next Prince of Wales. Immediately following the death of Edward the Black Prince, Edward III makes a good move and then crowns his grandson as Prince of Wales. Because Edward the Black Prince dies 1376. Immediately following that, Edward III names his heir to be Edward the Black Prince's son, who is 9 years old at the time. He was born in 1367. This is 1376. Crowns his 9-year-old grandson as Prince of Wales. At the time, he's known as Prince Richard of Bordeaux, just to keep the Angevin Empire going. It was the House of Anjou back then. Nowadays, we know him as the Plantagenets. And Richard here was like one of the main senior heirs, the most senior heir of Edward III that's alive. But Edward III ends up dying the next year in 1377. So Prince Richard of Bordeaux only ends up being Prince of Wales for about a year, and then he has to take the throne. So he ends up becoming king in 1377, and he rules until 1399. He never ends up having any kids that survive. And in 1399, he becomes King Richard II. In 1399, his cousin, or his uncle John of Gaunt dies, and the Duke of Lancaster title is passed down to Henry IV, or to his son Henry, who is the first cousin of Richard II. He comes in 1399, gathers up an army to come in and usurp the throne from Richard II. He's on an expedition in Ireland or something. Comes back in 1399, and Henry comes in and imprisons Richard III. He imprisons Richard II in the Tower of London, and he dies in February of 1400, probably of starvation or something like that. But Richard II was a very unpopular king. A lot of people didn't like him because of the Peasants' Revolt in the 1380s, and he was just the tyranny that was going on during his reign. He was just not a very stable monarch at all. A lot of people did not like him. He was pretty insane, too. A lot of people did not like him. So that allowed Henry Bolingbroke to become Henry IV. Although Henry IV is still part of the House of Plantagenet, it just kind of splits into the Lancaster branch. So there was no Prince of Wales during Richard II's reign. The next Prince of Wales will be crowned when Henry IV takes over. So Henry IV becomes king. He crowns his eldest son, Prince Henry of Monmouth, as the next Prince of Wales in 1399. This guy will eventually become King Henry V once his father dies. So this is the eldest son of Henry IV. His name is Prince Henry of Monmouth. At the time, he was crowned immediately following the usurpation, is that a word? The usurping of Richard II. The Lancastrians get onto the throne in 1399, and Henry IV crowns Prince Henry of Monmouth as the Prince of Wales. At this time, Henry is about 13 years old, just like Edward the Black Prince. He was born in 1386. and he becomes Prince of Wales in 1399. He holds that title until 1413 when his father, Henry IV, dies. Henry IV was on the throne for 14 years, passes the throne on to Henry V. So Prince Henry of Monmouth becomes Henry V in 1413, but he doesn't have any kids. So what happens is he ends up ruling until 1422. He only rules for 9 years. He hosts a lot of campaigns and conquests in France, carries those out, and actually he has a son in December of 1421, but he doesn't crown him Prince of Wales because Henry dies in August or September of 1422, also of dysentery. He dies of battle dysentery, just like Edward the Black Prince. He's almost identical, except he was 13 when he became Prince of Wales. He dies of dysentery on the battlefield very shortly when he's pretty young. Henry V, he's in his 30s. But he's got a 9-year-old son, but that son does not actually get to be crowned Prince of Wales yet. But Henry V, he was a great king for the 9 years that he ruled. But yeah, that was just how that went. He dies in 1422 of battle dysentery, which is quite a shame. So, following that, but he's just like Edward the Black Prince in that regard. The only difference is Henry V actually became king. Edward the Black Prince did not. So, Edward the Black Prince died before his father, Henry V, did become king. He was a great monarch. One of the greatest monarchs England had in that time period. So, this right here is Henry VI. This is the 9-month-old son of Henry of Monmouth right here, Henry V. That is his 9-month-old son who becomes king in 1422. Henry VI is absolutely insane. Actually, Henry V almost became king of France too. That goes back to Charles the Mad of France, who kind of signed a pact with him, but he died like a month before, so it didn't actually go to him with his 9-month-old son. And then Charles VII ended up inheriting the throne of France anyway, as House of Valois. It's just, I've talked about that plenty of times. Story for another time, I guess. But 100 Years' War is very complicated. Henry VI loses the 100 Years' War against France. But Henry VI, Edward the Black Prince, that was way back during like the Black Death and stuff. He did not die of the Black Death though. He died of dysentery. Just you know that. Henry VI has a son in 1454 named Edward. So Prince Edward of Lancaster. He's also known as Edward of Westminster, so you'll hear that name too for him. But Henry VI was absolutely insane. I mean, he grew up basically everything handed to him as king, and he's pretty much an insanity monarch. He rules with insanity, pretty much. He just has bouts of madness during his reign. But he did end up having a son and crowns him Prince of Wales. Edward of Westminster. He is Prince of Wales twice. First time, and you'll know because of the Wars of the Roses. He serves the first time from 1454 to 1460. For those of you guys that don't know, in 1461, at the Battle of Towton, Edward, who's the Duke of York, comes in and takes over Henry VI and becomes King of England. But Henry VI is able to take back the throne in 1470, but then he's deposed again and killed in 1471. That's the problem when you have an ex-monarch hanging around that's just always going to be at war. You have to kill the ex-monarch. It's just kind of how it goes. But his son was able to live through all of that, and so was Henry VI. But Henry VI is killed and deposed then killed in 1471, and I believe Edward of Westminster was probably also killed that year as well. But he never became king. He never ended up becoming king anyway. So, now there was another person crowned Prince of Wales, kind of unwillingly. It probably wasn't really wanted to happen. Richard, the Duke of York. Now, this guy was who claimed to be King of England through the succession. Get off my webcam. All right. So, during the Wars of the Roses, it was pretty a weird time period. But this guy, Henry VI, was the most senior heir through a strict male-only line, But this guy was the most senior heir through a line that allowed females, because Lionel, the second son of Edward III, actually had a line that went down to the 1460s through a female, because he had a daughter, but no sons. But if you remember, Richard II was overthrown in 1399 by the Lancasters. So the Lancasters, in my eyes, are the legitimate kings, because Henry IV became king out of right of conquest. But they still claim to be, because Edward III had a lot of descendants. Actually, I happen to be a descendant of Edward III myself, through like an illegitimate line somewhere. He's got a lot of descendants. Somehow I am also descended from Edward III. And Henry VII, even some of the Tudors. I'm pretty sure I am, yeah. Through the Scottish monarchs. They're all related, guys. So the Duke of York, Richard, he becomes Prince of Wales in 1460. Basically, crowns himself Prince of Wales, honestly. But he rules until the 1460. Well, he doesn't rule. He serves until 1460 as Prince of Wales, but he gets killed on the battlefield. Was the Battle of Stamford Bridge, I think, was the battle that killed Richard, the Duke of York? Pretty sure that was it. Let me make sure here. He was killed at the Battle of Wakefield. December 30th of 1460. He's killed. But 1461, Battle of Towton happens, and then his son, Edward, ends up overthrowing Henry VI and becoming king. So, he becomes king, Edward IV, in 1461. There's no Prince of Wales. Like I said, 1470, Henry VI gets back on the throne. His eldest son becomes Prince of Wales again, Edward of Westminster. They both get out of there, and then Henry VI is killed in 1471 by Edward or someone on their behalf there. Someone on his behalf, probably in the Tower of London or whatever it was. So, he's got a 1-year-old son named Prince Edward of York, who then becomes Prince of Wales. He's Prince of Wales for 12 years, from 1471 to 1483. Now, for those of you guys that don't know what happens, Edward IV rules until his death in 1483. The young boy here becomes King Edward V, but he only rules for 2 months. Edward IV dies in April of 1483, and Edward V rules until June of 1483. So 2 months, because his uncle, Richard III, comes in right before his coronation. He's with his uncle on his mom's side, a man named Anthony Woodville, because his wife was Elizabeth Woodville. Her brother, Anthony Woodville, was riding Edward and then his younger brother Richard to London to be crowned king in June of 1483. But the uncle on his father's side, Edward IV's younger brother Richard, intercepts Anthony Woodville and says, "Hey, I'm going to take it from here. I'm going to take the princes. I'll take them up to London. You can go back to whatever you were doing, not to get in your way or anything." So he takes them to the Tower of London, has them executed. Well, we don't really know what happened to them. They were never seen again, the two boys. So Richard III becomes king after that, because he's next in line anyway. Because he had already just completely, there was another brother named George who was just completely they denounced his rights, because he actually was on the Lancastrian side during the Wars of the Roses, so they had him out of there. That's just what happened with that. So it's kind of like Scar from the Lion King, who kills his brother and his thing. So Richard III becomes king, 1483. Now, he kills both of his nephews, so they're gone. So he's next in line. The last king from the House of Plantagenet. Now, Richard III actually did have a son named Prince Edward of Middleham, and he does officially get crowned Prince of Wales. Now, I got to make it clear that this video is only the Prince of Wales. There were a couple princesses of Wales, like Elizabeth II. She was a princess of Wales, but this is just princes of Wales. So, he was actually crowned, and only ones that are officially crowned. Not ones that are just, in theory, Prince of Wales. These are actually princes of Wales that actually were a thing. Richard III did crown his son, Edward of Middleham, Prince of Wales, and he dies in 1484. But the next year, in 1485, Richard III is fighting at the Battle of Bosworth Field, against Henry Tudor, and he gets killed. And then Henry VII becomes king in 1485. So the next Prince of Wales is Henry VII, which establishes the House of Tudor. His eldest son, Prince Arthur Tudor. Now, he's pretty famous because he was the guy who originally married Catherine of Aragon. So he becomes Prince of Wales in 1489, and he dies in 1502 before his father, Henry VII, died in 1509. That was his eldest son. He was expected to become king, but he dies. He dies as a teenager. He's very young. He's like 15 or 16, or maybe a little bit older. Maybe he's in his 20s. I don't know. He's really young. He marries Catherine of Aragon, but then Catherine of Aragon ends up marrying Henry VIII, his younger brother. So in 1502, or at least 1504, 2 years later, Henry VII crowns his second son, Henry, as Prince of Wales. So it's not like he did have multiple sons. So he ends up serving as Prince of Wales until 1509, when his father, Henry VII, dies. But following this period, following the death of Henry VII, there's not going to be another Prince of Wales for another 101 years. It's going to be another century before we get the next Prince of Wales. So stuff goes down. The next Prince of Wales is not until the House of Stuart takes over. So now the crowns of England and Scotland are united under one monarch now. So this is a very prestigious position. So in 1610, 7 years after taking the throne, King James I of England crowns his eldest son, Prince Henry Frederic Stuart, as Prince of Wales. Now, some of you are probably like, who the heck is this guy? He didn't become king. Well, you're right, he didn't become king. He died in 1612 at the age of, I think he was a teenager. He was like 15 or something like that. 14, 15, or 16. Maybe 17. When he died. James I lived until 1625. Now, the reason you're probably wondering why there was no Princes of Wales before that, in the last 100 years. Basically, Henry VIII has trouble getting a son. He marries 6 times, and that son, it was never crowned. Edward VI, he was never crowned Prince of Wales, officially. But after him, he was followed by 2 queens, both Mary I, who never had any kids, and then Elizabeth I, who never had any kids. So there was no Princes of Wales. But that caused kind of a succession crisis because it ended up going to the Stuarts in Scotland. But James did have a son. So Henry Frederick Stuart, they bring back the title. It almost seemed like the Prince of Wales title was done for, but it still exists today. Remember, it was established by Edward I, Edward Longshanks, Hammer of the Scots, way back in 1301. So very old. So this is he only is Prince of Wales for 2 years. He dies in 1612, becomes Prince of Wales in 1610, dies in 1612. So, luckily, though, James I does have another son, who's Charles, Prince Charles Stuart, who ends up becoming Prince of Wales. Kind of like what happened with Henry VII's sons. His eldest son, Arthur, died before taking the throne. So, just to ensure that Prince of Wales title stays merged into the crown, he crowns his second son, Prince of Wales, Charles. Charles is crowned in 1616. And he was Prince of Wales until 1625 when his father James I dies. Charles becomes king in 1625. So Charles I, he's got a son in 1630 named Charles. He is crowned Prince of Wales in 1638, and he is Prince of Wales until 1649, when Charles I gets beheaded and executed during the English Civil War. Now, this is actually King Charles II, believe it or not. He looks really young there. I tried to get pictures of these portraits of them. For almost all of them, not all of them, but almost all of them were actually portraits that were actually created while they were Prince of Wales. That's why Charles II looks so young here. He was only 8 years old when he became Prince of Wales, and then he was 19 when his father died. But Charles II did not inherit the throne because it went to the Commonwealth under Oliver Cromwell during the interregnum period in the English Civil War. Very brutal time for England there. But he inherits thrones of England and Scotland in 1660. That's when he becomes king anyway. So that's Charles II. He never has any legitimate kids, so he never has a Prince of Wales under him. He's got a lot of kids with mistresses, but no kids with the actual queen, his wife. So his line kind of died with him there. But yeah, that's Charles II. He looks really young there, believe it or not. That is actually Charles II. Alright, moving on to the next Prince of Wales. This guy's pretty famous. if you know anything about the Jacobite rebellions, very famous during the Jacobite period. Now, he's not Prince of Wales very long. He was only Prince of Wales when he was a baby, a newborn baby. Ironically. So, I mentioned that Charles here becomes king in 1660. It's Charles II. He dies in 1685. Has no sons, legitimate sons, to take or legitimate children to take the throne. He had a lot of kids with mistresses, none with his wife, the queen. So his line died with him. But he did have a brother named James, who becomes king in 1685. Problems go down because previously following the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s, from ever since Elizabeth I in the 1550s, for the last 130 years, every single monarch of England had been Protestant. And most people liked it that way. So they weren't really, they didn't really care too much. Because in the 1680s, something posed a problem. Because James II, the King of England, converted to Catholicism. So he was now Catholic. He converted to Catholicism. But people weren't really worried about that because he did have two daughters, Mary and Anne. His eldest daughter was Mary, who was expected to take the throne after him. And his wife was old by this point, so they probably weren't going to have any more kids. She was Protestant, so they weren't really worried about that because they knew the line was going to pass through her anyway. However, James remarries a Catholic woman as a second wife, and in 1688 has a son with that second wife named James Francis Edward Stuart. He's known as the Old Pretender because he tried to rebel and take back the throne because he is actually kind of like the true King of England. He was Catholic. So what happened was something known as the Glorious Revolution. They invited the nobles of England, basically kicked out James II. They told him, hey, you're going to get out of here or there's going to be blood. So James II just kind of left, and they invited Mary, his eldest daughter, and her husband William, who was the Prince of Orange, to come in through the Netherlands. He was Dutch, to come in and take the throne of England in 1688, 1689, known as the Glorious Revolution. Now, James II, good thing he got out of there because he probably would have ended up getting executed. So he takes his son and they move over to France. And that's where they live basically the rest of their life. That does not mean that there's going to be people trying to get his son and even his grandson onto the throne. His grandson was Bonnie Prince Charlie, known as the Young Pretender. And then James is the Old Pretender. So all the way through the reign of George II in the House of Hanover in the 1740s, there's still Jacobite rebellions going on. They're known as the Jacobites. But they were all Catholic. That's the Catholic line. But they signed a law that said only Protestants can inherit the throne of England. So that was the problem there. So he's Prince of Wales. The next Prince of Wales is not until we get the German kings to take over the throne. So basically what happens here, James's daughter his daughter Mary and her husband William become joint reigning monarchs. They never have any kids. But James II's second daughter, Queen Anne, becomes queen in 1702. She's got one son who only lived to be about 11 years old. He died 11 years old in the year 1700. And I feel so bad for Queen Anne. She had 17 children, and none of them survived to adulthood. None of them outlived her. And that's just how it went. So she didn't have any heirs. But the next Protestant heir was a third or fourth cousin or something. They had to go all the way back to James I's eldest daughter to find, it was her youngest child, Sophia of the Palatinate, who was the next Protestant heir. She actually died a couple months before Queen Anne did. And it was her eldest son, George, and Sophia of the Palatinate married the Prince Elector of Hanover, which was a German kingdom. George III comes in. George I comes in as King of England now. He speaks German. He barely does anything in England during his reign. He barely spends any time in England, and he doesn't even speak English. He speaks German his whole life. And so that's kind of how the Prime Minister is created, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So his eldest son is George Augustus, who's pretty much German too. They're all from the House of Hanover. It is now Great Britain. The kingdom is now Great Britain now because they officially collide in 1707. So he will eventually become, this is actually King George II. He'll become King George II. And he's Prince of Wales from 1714 to 1727 throughout the entire reign of George I, his father. George I dies in 1727. Therefore, George II becomes King of England. And he's got a son. 2 years later, in 1729, he crowns his eldest son, Prince Frederic Louis of Wales, as the Prince of Wales. Now, he's Prince of Wales until he dies in 1751. George II actually ended up outliving his eldest son. But he had a grandson, Frederick's son. So yeah, Frederick dies before his father, but he has a son, and it's his eldest son, Prince George William Frederick, who ends up being crowned the next Prince of Wales, immediately following the death of Frederick, George II's son. So his grandson becomes the next Prince of Wales, George William Frederick. Now this is actually King George III when he was Prince of Wales, and he is Prince of Wales until George II dies in 1760. George II dies in the toilet in October 1760, and he's like in his 70s, which is not bad. He's born in 1683, and then Prince George William Frederick becomes King of Great Britain in 1760, George III. Now, George III is pretty famous, Mad King George, as he's known as. Lost the colonies and his mind, so, you know, he went mad through his later years, and he actually formed the United Kingdom in 1801. Now, he doesn't have any kids for 2 years. He has his first son in 1762, named George Augustus Frederick, who is Prince of Wales. Now, he was Prince of Wales for a whopping 58 years, from 1762 all the way until his father died in 1820. George Augustus Frederick dies he is Prince of Wales, Prince George of Wales, until 1820. And he's born in 1762, and he's basically crowned Prince of Wales from the moment he's born. The moment he opens his eyes and he's born, he's Prince of Wales, because George III wanted to make sure that was going to stay in the House of Hanover. So George III rules for 60 years. He's the longest reigning king of Britain, third longest reigning monarch, but the longest reigning king. One of the longest reigning European monarchs. So in 1820, George III dies at the age of like 82 or 83 years old, and then his eldest son becomes George IV. But George IV, he kind of ends up ruling through the last 10 years because George III went mad, and he was kind of the king, but George III was still the king. So Prince of Wales, he was basically running the place. But sad story is, in 1817, George's only child, he has a daughter named Charlotte. She dies in 1817 at the age of like 21, giving birth to a child. And not only does that child die, but Charlotte also dies as well. She dies in childbirth, who is going to be the great-grandchild of George III. So that's very sad. Not only so the line gets screwed. But by the time George IV dies, he dies in 1830. He only ends up ruling for 10 years. George III had a lot of sons, by the way. The second son was dead. His name was Ernest Augustus. He was dead. The third son, William, ends up becoming king in 1830. He never has any kids either, but he dies in 1837. The fourth son of George III is also dead, but that son had one daughter who becomes Queen Victoria. So it goes from the first son to the third son to the fourth son's daughter, who becomes Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria was the last monarch of the House of Hanover. She was on the throne for 64 years, 63 or 64 years, dies in 1901. She becomes queen in 1837. She's the last monarch from the House of Hanover. Then we get the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. She marries Prince Albert. So Prince Albert Edward becomes the next Prince of Wales, her eldest son. He'll eventually become Edward VII. That's Edward VII when he was Prince of Wales. He was a young man. 1841, the moment he's born, he becomes Prince of Wales, allegedly, pretty much. And he is Prince of Wales for 60 years. He's actually Prince of Wales longer than George was. Longer than George IV was. He's Prince of Wales all the way until the time his mother dies in 1901. Then he becomes king. But his son is... Oh, crap. I don't think his son was... No, I did that. I don't know what happened. I lost the slide. But okay, I messed it up. Somehow it got deleted. George V becomes the son of Edward VII. He becomes Prince of Wales, and he's Prince of Wales until 1910. Whatever. 1910, George V becomes king from the House of Windsor now. Changes it during World War I because of the German name. He was fighting the German Empire. He did not want that name to be German, so he changed it to Windsor, as of Windsor Castle, their residence. His eldest son is Edward of Wales. In 1910, crowns him Prince of Wales, and he serves until 1936 when his father dies. And then Edward VIII becomes king. Edward VIII. But Edward VIII reigns less than a year because he wanted to marry an American divorcee. So he abdicated in December of 1936. He becomes king in January. He only rules for 11 months. So then his brother George becomes George VI, or I guess his name's Albert Bertie, becomes George VI. And then he has a daughter who becomes Elizabeth II in 1952. But George V did not really think his son Edward VIII would actually be a good king. He didn't think he'd actually be a good king, and he quoted, "I want nothing to come between the throne, Bertie and Lilibet," who was referring to as Elizabeth, his granddaughter. Come between Bertie and Elizabeth and Lilibet and the throne, because he did not really think Edward VIII was going to be a good king. But he ended up abdicating anyway, because his father would not let him marry her. So he abdicated in Wallace Simpson. He married Wallace Simpson. He abdicated in 1936. So Elizabeth II becomes queen after her father, George VI, dies in 1952. Now, the names are ridiculously long. Edward VIII had an extremely long name. I just called him Edward of Wales. He had a huge name. He had like 7 names or something crazy like that. And it wouldn't even fit on the screen, so that's how that went. But Elizabeth II has a son during George VI's reign. His name is Prince Charles Philip Arthur George of Wales. Charles Philip Arthur George of Wales is the Prince of Wales title. When he's 10 years old in 1958, Elizabeth II becomes queen in 1952. 6 years later, crowns her, bestows the Prince of Wales title upon her eldest son, Charles. And he's Prince of Wales, the longest serving Prince of Wales. He was Prince of Wales for 64 years until 2022, when his mother, Elizabeth II, passed away at the age of 96 after being on the throne for 70 years. Rest in peace, Elizabeth II. So, in 2022, Charles becomes King Charles III. So, that brings us to the present day, with Prince William Arthur Philip Louis of Wales. He's now the current Prince of Wales. He's been Prince of Wales since 2022. So, he is the eldest son of Charles III right now, and is now set to become King William V upon the death of his father, Charles III. So that is going to conclude every single Prince of Wales from the time that Wales was conquered by Edward I in the 1280s and all the way down to the modern day. So I want to thank you guys for watching. Be sure to comment, like, subscribe. Let me know who your favorite Prince of Wales was, and what you think about the title. You think they should keep using it, or should they get rid of it because it's so old? But it's always been the tradition to have the eldest son as the Prince of Wales. And, probably learned a lot. Studying these, I found it interesting to find out some of the monarchs. There was quite a few that missed out on becoming king, whether because they died before their father or whatever it was. So, that is all 20 or so Princes of Wales that have existed. And I'll see you guys next time. Be sure to comment, like, subscribe. Goodbye. Wah!